Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll go over the results from Tuesday's primaries in Maryland, West Virginia, and Nebraska. And we'll preview the upcoming primaries in Oregon, as well as one highly competitive general election. And we'll do it with help from Dirk VanderHart of Oregon Public Broadcasting. Buckle up. Hello, I'm Jacob Rubashkin, Deputy Editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan political analysis for 40 years. And I just got back from New Jersey's 3rd District, which is represented for now by Democrat Andy Kim.
And I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, and I'm pretty sure I stayed in New Jersey's 3rd District during the 2016 Democratic National Convention, which was in Philadelphia, but our hotel, I believe, was in Mount Laurel, and I think that's in the 3rd District. So a few years apart in our visits, but we were there. New Jersey 3.
Yeah, I did not stay there. I was up and back in a day, but it's a lovely part of the state, lovely South Jersey. So highly recommend it to anyone looking to get away.
There you go.
So let's get into it. Before we talk about our Oregon primaries and general elections, we got to recap briefly what happened last night, recording this on Wednesday, of course, what happened on Tuesday in those Democratic and Republican primaries in Maryland, Nebraska, and West Virginia. So in Maryland, Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks won the closely watched Democratic primary for Senate, but it wasn't particularly close. Despite her opponent, David Trone, spending $62 million of his own money. That's a lot of pallets of wine right there from his Total Wine and More fortune. Despite $62 million from his own pocket on his campaign, Alsobrooks is up on Trone 12 points with about 2/3 of the vote counted. She will, of course, face former Governor Larry Hogan, a Republican, in the fall in a very important fight for the Senate. Elsewhere in the state, Democrats Johnny Olszewski, Sarah Elfreth, and April McLean Delaney won their House primaries in the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th districts. All three of them are likely to be members of Congress next year. Nathan, what happened in Nebraska and West Virginia?
Yeah, in Nebraska, probably the race that most people were watching were Congressman Don Bacon in the 2nd district. This is the Omaha-based district. Congressman Bacon had a primary, but it ended up not being close. He ended up winning. It looks like it was 62-38 as votes were still being counted. And so that just sets up a general election, a competitive general election with State Senator Tony Vargas. Democrats are excited because Democrats didn't have a competitive primary last night. And so it allowed Vargas to kind of focus his campaign, money, energy on the general election. Now that'll be 5 months away. But we have that race rated as a tilt Republican. And so slightly in favor of Congressman Bacon. The two Republican senators, Deb Fischer and Pete Ricketts, did not have serious primaries. In West Virginia, there were some consequential primaries. In West Virginia, in the Senate, Governor Jim Justice defeated Congressman Alex Mooney to be the Republican nominee. This is for Senator Joe Manchin's open seat, since Senator Manchin is not running for re-election. And so effectively, Governor Justice will be a senator next year. That's also important for the fight for the Senate because gaining West Virginia, taking it over from Democrats, if former President Donald Trump wins the White House, that means control of the Senate would go toward Republicans because the new Republican vice president could break tie votes. We were also watching the 1st and 2nd congressional districts. The 1st district, Congresswoman Carol Miller faced a primary from former state delegate Derek Evans. Derek Evans served some time in jail for his involvement in the January 6th insurrection, but she ended up winning fairly handily in that race. And then in the second district, this is to replace Congressman Mooney, who ran for the Senate. State Treasurer Riley Moore won that GOP nomination. And because it's such a Republican district, he will be a member of Congress next year. Riley Moore is the nephew of Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito. And there was also a race for governor to replace Jim Justice, and State Attorney General Patrick Morrisey won that nomination. Some of you might remember Morrisey's name. He lost to Joe Manchin back in 2018. He also ran for New Jersey. That's actually when it was before I started working with Stu at the Rothenberg Political Report. But Stu interviewed him when he ran in New Jersey for Congress in 2000 and lost a primary there. Jacob, that's a lot, but did I miss anything?
I think the thing you have to remember about West Virginia is that there are about 10 people in the state and they're all running for office until their kids run for office. So Patrick Morrisey defeated in that Republican primary Moore Capito, who is Shelley Moore Capito's son, and Chris Miller, who is the son of Congresswoman Carol Miller. In the Secretary of State primary, because Morrisey also beat Mac Warner, the Secretary of State, in the primary to replace Mac Warner, his brother, Chris Warner, won that primary. Fully 3/4 of the West Virginia congressional delegation, starting next year, Shelley Moore Capito, Riley Moore, and Carol Miller will be the child or grandchild of former members of Congress. So Shelley Moore Capito, obviously the daughter of former governor and former Congressman Arch Moore, Riley Moore, her nephew, grandson of Arch Moore, and then Carol Miller, her father, Samuel Devine, was a congressman from Ohio several decades ago who was a high ranking member of the Republican conference, I believe in the 1970s. So this is a state that likes their political dynasties. And that didn't change last night. If you want to know more, read my story, The Nepo Babies of the House of Representatives, on InsideElections.com.
And we saw one of the reasons why Congresswoman Miller was viewed as vulnerable, or people were watching that race, is because of the attacks that were being leveled against her son, Chris Miller, in the governor's race. And so, the Miller, the name that there was concern, I think that, her negatives were going up because of that residual impact of those television ads on the air. I'll also point out that there are now we have 17 House candidates and now 5 Senate candidates who are likely to be members of Congress next year, meaning they won primaries in districts or states that are either very Republican or very Democratic. I'll say one primaries, a couple of them. Andy Kim from New Jersey, that New Jersey primary hasn't come up yet, but he's going to be the Democratic nominee. And then Lisa Blunt Rochester in Delaware represents the entire state at large in Congress, but she's running for the Senate. So those primaries technically haven't happened, but anyway, the point is that there are already 22 members, likely new members of the next Congress, and we're not even to Memorial Day, but it shows the importance of primaries because primaries in these districts and states that are very Republican and very Democratic.
Yeah, primaries matter. You should go vote. I want to introduce our special guest, Dirk VanderHart. Dirk has covered Oregon for the last decade and a half at the Portland Mercury and most recently at Oregon Public Broadcasting, where he is a state politics reporter. Dirk, thank you so much for being here bright and early on the West Coast. I know it's an early morning for you. Before we get into our congressional races, though, you got to answer the one question that we ask all of our guests on the show. What congressional district did you grow up in?
Yeah, well, first, it's great to be here. I grew up in Michigan's 3rd congressional district, so all around Grand Rapids and West Michigan. It is kind of an interesting one. It is a longtime Republican sort of stronghold that in redistricting this last round got made a little more liberal. So Hillary Skolton is the current representative there. Peter Meyer, took the impeachment vote against President Trump and paid the price for it. I haven't lived there since 2007, so I'm not fully up to date. But yeah, that's where I grew up, Grand Rapids.
And did you grow up in a particular political family, or what was that like?
I wouldn't say overtly political. It wasn't, it wasn't a lot of around the dinner table politics chat. But West Michigan is interesting. It was this sort of like old school Republican stronghold, right? Conservative Protestantism, a lot of Dutch, Dutch community there, which is why my name is Dirk VanderHart. And it has just grown a lot more liberal, and people are coming in, so it is interesting to go back and sort of see the changes when we do visit.
Yeah, a real interesting progression from Justin Amash to Peter
Yeah,
Meyer and now
right.
to Hillary Scholten.
And when I was growing up, it was all Vern Ehlers all the time, man. Couldn't get that guy out of office.
Well, we do want to talk to you about Oregon in addition to Michigan. So let's get right into it. There are a whole bunch of really interesting House races going on in Oregon right now. Let's start in the third district, where there is an open seat. Longtime Congressman Earl Blumenauer retiring at the end of this term, and the Democratic primary, which is in a week, is getting pretty spicy.
It is. Yeah, I mean it's been spicy for a time. So, just to set some baseline here, Oregon is an all vote by mail state. The ballots went out May 1st, so people have had them. People have been able to put them in their mailbox or put them in a drop box for weeks now. But yeah, we have a spicy race, actually spicier than I thought when I picked this one up. This is a race between Sushila Jayapal. She is a former Multnomah County commissioner who is also the sister of Pramila Jayapal of the Progressive Caucus in Washington State. We have a state representative named Maxine Dexter, who is a doctor, and that has figured in somewhat prominently to all this. And then we have a city council person from a Portland suburb called Gresham, whose name is Eddie Morales, who has a fairly long background in DC politics, consulting, communication stuff that he is sort of bringing to bear, and also a pretty compelling personal story. This started out as a very, I would say, polite race. Everyone kind of gets along on things and agrees with most topics. And it has really gotten a lot more, as you say, spicy, a little bit more ugly as the 21st of May gets closer.
And to what extent are voters even aware of Jayapal's relationship, being a sister to a congresswoman a few hours away? But
Yeah.
is that even a factor?
I mean, I think it's more, it plays out in the sort of mechanics of her campaign. I don't think people are thinking about how they feel about Pramila Jayapal, at least in terms of the on the ground voter. But, having a sister in Congress with those relationships, I think there's no doubt has benefited Jayapal's campaign here. She's got, the nod from Bernie Sanders. She's got the nod from some of the more progressive members on the Hill. And Pramila Jayapal is the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So, she has been able to tap those relationships. She is running as the most progressive candidate. She says Green New Deal all the time, single payer healthcare, a sort of uncompromising progressive stance is the sort of lane she's staking here. I don't think anyone is looking at her and trying to compare her sister, who, by the way, she looks a lot like and actually sounds a lot like. I don't know that rates, but I think it does show up in the sort of architecture of the campaign.
And I think they would be the first sisters since the Sanchez sisters in California, who were the first sisters ever to serve in Congress together. I want to play a brief clip from a press conference that Jayapal and Morales had a couple weeks ago, touching on what's become a major flashpoint in this race.
What we know is that there are MAGA Republican donors and groups that are funneling money into elections. We're asking for transparency. So what we know is that this spend for 314 action is outside anything that it has ever done before. It's never spent this kind of money in a race before.
So that was a press conference about the outside spending in this race. Dirk, how has the involvement of 314 Action, this new group, Voters for Responsive Government, upended this race in the closing weeks?
This has sort of been the story of this race. And I'll be frank, it is something that people have been looking for since November, right? Since really when Blumenauer announced he would retire, and then Jayapal got into the race. And that's because, I mean, we should start by saying everyone from the get-go expected that after October 7th, there would be some AIPAC interest in this race, some pro-Israel interest in this race, and specifically in not electing Jayapal, who at least the conventional wisdom has suggested, wouldn't be the kindest sort of sitting representative toward Israel. Maybe that group is looking at her sister and her sister's stances and saying, we don't need a Jayapal in Congress. So for months now, there has been suspicion and whispers that, AIPAC is going to show up in some way, shape, or form in this race, probably to attack Jayapal, but we don't know. And so it's been really interesting to track the independent expenditures that have shown up. As you said, Jacob, 314 Action, and as they said in the press conference, 314 Action, this super PAC that is committed to electing Democratic people with a science background, came in hard for Maxine Dexter, and they could credibly say, she is a doctor. She is exactly the kind of candidate that we want to see in Congress, and we are going to really support her. And they have, to the tune of, I don't even know at this point, it was 1.6 million. I haven't checked the latest, but it is a lot of money, and they are not wrong to suggest that it is more money than 314 Action has spent in primaries in the past. So that has been a major boost to Maxine Dexter. She's got all this airtime, all these ads everywhere you look proclaiming how great she is. And then we get these other groups coming in. There is the Voters for a Responsive Government that Jacob mentioned. That is a group that we really have no clue who is funding or what their motives are. They haven't said, but they have launched more than $1 million in broadcast ads and mailers against Jayapal. Not on Israel. I think that's the pattern that we see in a lot of races around the country. This is not an Israel issue. That wouldn't play well to voters in Oregon's 3rd Congressional District. But what they are saying is just sort of attacking her history as an elected official and sort of not being successful at tackling the city and state's biggest challenges. And there's more, Eddie Morales has some independent spending from the realtors. There's always whispers of more money coming in. So I think, in terms of like the hard side fundraising the candidates have done, fairly even, though we can talk about some of the differences that have emerged there as well. That seems also potentially tied to pro-Israel money. But the IEs really seem to be the story of this race. And I think, a lot of people that are in this race, that are, involved in the campaigns, sort of expect that it could be a difference maker, or the difference maker come the 21st.
I mean, we just got out of this Maryland primary in Maryland's 3rd district, where UDP, the AIPAC Super PAC, came in and spent $1 bazillion on behalf of a candidate who ultimately won by a comfortable margin last night. And I do find it interesting, though, that if it is indeed the case that that's where the money is coming from, that they feel the need to channel it through either 314 or when we get the financial disclosures and see, who is funding Voters for Responsive Government, which I don't think we'll know before Election Day, right? I mean, I think that it's gonna be a post Election Day filing.
It depends with that one, because I think they started on the 1st of May, but they may have formed late April. It's doubtful that the April, like, they got a big funnel of cash in April that is going to come out May 20th. But I do want to note, though, that, like, even though we are a little bit ambiguous on where some of the IE side money is, we have seen in Maxine Dexter's fundraising recently that she does appear to have major AIPAC support. She has held fundraisers. She reported on May 7th, a May 7th fundraiser, or at least fundraising push, where she made more than $218,000 in a single day. And if you look at those donors, I mean, many of them are out-of-state donors that have given to AIPAC in the past, or AIPAC candidates in the past, and even to, as Dexter's opponents are very gleefully pointing out, or maybe not so gleefully, Republicans. Mike Johnson or Ted Cruz or whoever. These are people that seem to be, and I can't speak for them, but seem to be aligned in some cases with Republican politics, but also very pro-Israel. And so, the message seems to be that AIPAC has sent word that Dexter is the candidate in Oregon's 3rd, and that she's the one getting all this money.
And for some context, we should tell, this is a liberal district, right? And this is it's a Portland and suburban Portland. district. And so this Democratic primary is the most important race, right? The general election in November is just a formality. So that's why we're seeing
Yep.
all these groups jump in, before Memorial Day, because this is the race that is effectively going to choose a member of Congress.
Yeah, it's more than 3-1 Democratic registration advantage here. There's no question that a Democrat will hold this seat. There is a question right now who that Democrat will be, but I would say Dexter seems to be getting a lot of the help,
Has there been any polling in the race? Do we actually know kind of where things stand with just a couple days left?
None that I've seen. I'm sure the campaigns have their own trackers. I've not really heard about anything credible that I'd want to talk about here, obviously. I just don't. I mean, again, like, I think that there's a sentiment that early on Jayapal was probably a front runner, just given some of those institutional advantages that we talked about. Now Maxine Dexter has come and she's been on the air consistently, a lot of positive stuff, and we have those attack ads on Jayapal, and I think that again, the conventional wisdom is that those are going to do their work and potentially get Dexter over the finish line. But if voters are engaged here, given that this is such a liberal district, it is possible that folks that are paying attention are looking at this and saying, well, I'm not in agreement with what AIPAC is doing. Why would I support this woman who has it makes me suspicious of her. That's why it was a little bit interesting to some people on the ground that this sort of overt support showed up in her hard side fundraising, because, she had been able to say she had no idea who was funding this before. And now that is not the case.
And I know we want to ask you about at least a couple other races, but this applies to all of these Oregon primaries. How soon do you think we'll know who wins based on how quickly votes are going to be counted? Yeah. Ballots they only have to be postmarked by election day, right? They don't even have to be received by election day. Right. So what are you expecting? When are you expecting to know who wins this race and others?
I mean, that's really just a question of, like, how close do I think the race is going to be? Most times in Oregon, I think the majority of races, not too long after 8 p.m., the polls close. Do we know, right? The early, people have been voting for weeks. The first sort of rush of ballots kind of tell the tale. I almost don't want to put myself on a limb on this one, because I'll guess one way and I'll be wrong.
Particularly in Clackamas County, no.
Yeah, well, right. We could talk about Clackamas. But yeah, I just don't know, Nathan. I mean, this is one that could come down to the wire. I think based on what we're hearing, it seems like it'll be Dexter or Jayapal, and maybe it'll be close. Or maybe, as I say, the money wins out and the messaging worked and it's not so close. Again, we just don't have polls.
Yeah.
Let's move due south from this district to the 5th district, which is also playing host to a particularly chippy Democratic primary. Let's take a listen at a couple campaign ads that have hit the airwaves in this district recently.
Politics are meaner and uglier than ever. And Jamie McLeod Skinner, she makes things worse. Fired by city council for creating a toxic work environment, then 5 former campaign staffers described her as a nightmarish boss.
Janelle Bynum's attacks are false. Here's the truth. Bynum voted to cut teacher pensions. And in Salem, she was the only vote against giving rape survivors more time to seek justice against their rapists.
So those were 2 ads from Oregon's 5th Congressional District Democratic primary, one of them from a super PAC, which is supporting State Representative Janelle Bynum, the other one from her opponent, Jamie McLeod Skinner, who was the 2022 Democratic nominee for this seat and is running again. Dirk, walk us through this race. Why has this Democratic primary become such a flashpoint?
Yeah, this is sort of the big one on the ground. The 5th Congressional District is one of the few quote unquote true toss-ups in the country this year, right? Biden won it in 2020 by, I think, 8 points or something. It wasn't a district then, but it was created in 21 redistricting. And Lori Chavez DeRemer, the sitting congresswoman, beat Jamie McLeod Skinner, one of the candidates in this primary in 2022, as you said. there is a lot of interest, I would say, among the more institutional players. I mean, the DCCC, Hakeem Jeffries, but also folks on the ground here in Oregon that tend to be sort of Democratic kingmakers, in not seeing Jamie McLeod Skinner be the nominee again, just because of that record. Just because she hasn't won. And in fact, she's run for a number of things in the state over the years, Congress, against a number of people, Secretary of State, and she has not been successful in any of those things. So there's a lot of interest in getting someone more, I guess, in a lot of people's minds, viable, who can potentially win this. Bynum has a track record that can show that. She actually won election to the state house twice against Lori Chavez Dreamer. Obviously, we are talking about different races and different districts, but she can credibly point to fighting close races with Chavez Dreamer and winning. So we have a very interesting scenario where Bynum is bringing all this sort of heft, all these endorsements. She's winning the money race. As you said, she's got these IE expenditures in her favor. And yet we have McLeod Skinner who doesn't go away. I mean, she is this candidate who's from Central Oregon. This is kind of an interesting district that stretches from the southeast sort of edges of Portland, crosses the Cascade Mountains, and has this sort of, I don't know, sanctuary, if you will, in Central Oregon, which is a very different part of the state, right? And that's where McLeod Skinner is from. That's where a lot of her base is. That's where she brings this experience where she can say, you know, we need Democrats who can cross the aisle, who bring a sort of blue collar or rural sensibility and can speak with Republicans on that level. I mean, that's really been her pitch over and over again. But what scares, I think, the Bynum camp is that she's been on the ballot so many times. She's got this grassroots support. I mean, you look at the county parties and you know, they went for her in 2022 when she defeated sitting Representative Kurt Schrader in the Democratic primary. A lot of them support her again. So there is this sort of existing support, these volunteers, these people that know they like Jamie McLeod Skinner. And that's what makes this so interesting.
Yeah, and it's you know, it's kind of a, I hadn't realized this, but it's a connection to the third district, the 314 action, which is so involved in that third district primary. I believe last cycle, Jamie McLeod Skinner was one of their big, champions, and then this cycle they have endorsed Bynum along with the rest of those institutional Democratic players. I guess the thing that I keep on coming back to, though, is that Jamie McLeod Skinner almost won this race, right? She came like 2,000 votes short. She got no outside. The party wrote her off after she beat Schrader in the primary. People were annoyed at her for doing that. Obviously, nobody likes it when an incumbent goes down, even one who had enemies like Kurt Schrader did. She got no help, and she very well nearly did it on her own, and with no real help from the top of the ticket either. I think this was, with that governor's race being so fraught for Democrats. Why is it that you wouldn't just go with the person who very nearly got it done last time and just help them out this time and see what happens?
My sense is that is a gamble that people aren't willing to take. She didn't win last time. I agree with you that the help wasn't there, but I think the help wasn't there in part because folks saw on the ground that the help might not work, and that there were bigger issues at play. And we should note, McLeod Skinner has been dogged by reports from former staffers, not just in the 22 race or this race or whatever, but going back to her time as a small town city manager. I mean, there has been a sense that her leadership can be a little bit, I would say, I don't know, mercurial, tempestuous. I mean, there are staffers who love her and her vision, and there are staffers who say she can be abusive or a taskmaster or however you want to put it. We have seen a number of reports that interview anonymously or otherwise former staffers for the campaign and have some real complaints about the tenor of her leadership and how that played out, in terms of stresses on the campaign trail or whatnot. So I think there have been, and McLeod Skinner would say absolutely these things are not true. There's some sour grapes, but really I listen to all my staffers and I love all my staffers and all that. But there have been some real concerns that have emerged from folks on the campaign side about how she conducts herself on the trail or sort of internally with staff. I think that definitely plays into it.
And yet it'll be interesting if McLeod Skinner ends up winning this primary. Democrats can't afford to just walk away from districts like this, right? They can't just, if they want to have a chance of winning the majority, they only need a net gain of 4 seats. The first place you go are those districts that Biden won in 2020, and so they might be in a similar situation to 2022, except for this time they at least know that the McLeod Skinner got close in the past, but these stories that Willamette Week, I think, and others have written about weren't a part of that 2022 conversation,
Right.
as well. I want to ask you one. It's kind of maybe a sensitive question, but I'll go live on this podcast and ask about race a little bit. Janelle Bynum, as an African American woman, this district is not, I say, not particularly diverse in terms of not diverse with a large Black population, probably growing Hispanic population. Does that matter at all? Is that a factor or an undertone in this congressional race?
Well, I would say that, Bynum has not shied from identity on the campaign trail. I think she is not in her political life. I mean, she's the only Black woman sitting in the Oregon legislature, and she often talks about that experience, her experience moving through the world as a Black person, as a Black mother, her worries about her children. I mean, it is very much at the forefront of her political sort of identity or story. I can't speak for the voters of the 5th district. I mean, in Portland and in and around Portland, I think probably having a representative of color, Oregon's first ever Black congressperson, is probably a very welcome thing. I think people might look at the comparison there very favorably. I don't know that that's the case in Central Oregon or some of the more rural parts. I can't speak for that. But I don't think that is a factor that Bynum is shying away from. I will say, I think that is something she is embracing.
It'd be interesting, and actually, Jacob, you might be able to find this after the fact. But if we indeed end up having a Hispanic woman, Lori Chavez DeRemer against the African American woman, or if it's Jamie McLeod Skinner, you have an LGBTQ woman against Hispanic woman. There's a lot of diversity. The matchup is going to have various levels of diversity, no matter how the primary plays out.
There is a very, actually, in Bynum's political story, this has come up. I forget if it was in 2018 or 2020 when she was running for the state house. She was canvassing a neighborhood, knocking doors, just like candidates do, and someone called the police on her because they saw a Black woman going door to door in some neighborhood in Happy Valley or wherever, and that wound up being a fine interaction. I think the sheriff came by and they had a pleasant chat with Janelle Bynum because she's a pleasant person. But that has been, I mean, that is sort of inherent in her political story, and obviously a shocking and pretty awful thing. I mean, that doesn't speak very highly to that neighborhood, I would say.
Nathan, it's interesting you bring that up because I think there was a little conversation I saw on Twitter this morning about kind of the fact that it's become almost, maybe not normalized, but the notion that it was up until very recently, you really didn't have very many Black members of Congress representing areas that weren't majority or plurality Black. And 2018 was a real turning point moment there. And now it's kind of, it doesn't seem like the fact that this district is less than 1% Black by population is at all any sort of hurdle or makes it difficult or impossible for Janelle Bynum to win a general election. I think she'd be a very credible general election candidate. But as recently as 2018, it was this question, for Lauren Underwood and Antonio Delgado in New York, and all of these, Colin Allred in Texas. There were New York Times, we're probably half dozen New York Times articles being like, is this something that's going to change now? And I think it's a sign of kind of how the Democratic Party has progressed in their thinking, and perhaps how voters have progressed as well, that it's no longer kind of the major point as it was back in 2018.
Yeah. Dirk, I have to ask you, across the district across I-5, in the 6th congressional district, it's where I grew up. This is Democratic Congresswoman Andrea Salinas and the Republican Mike Erickson.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because by the numbers, the 5th district that we just talked about and the 6th district are not incredibly different, and yet the 6th district is not being talked about at all, really, about the conversation of the battle for the House. We have it rated as likely Democratic, but there's a lawsuit where Mike Erickson is suing Salinas over from the past campaign, from the 2022 race. I guess, where does that stand, and what is happening in that race?
Yeah, so I mean, during redistricting in 21, the 6th was always seen as a pretty safe bet for Dems. You're right; it's not that different, but I think it went 13 points for Biden in 20. It was always seen as one the Democrats, if they put forward a strong candidate, probably could hold. So this looks like it's going to be a rematch. You're right, Congresswoman Salinas and Mike Erickson. This was an ugly race. I mean, Mike Erickson has run, I don't know, 3-4 times for Congress in the past, maybe more.
Yeah, against Darlene Hooley. I mean, it goes back a ways.
He's a very rich person, so he can self-fund himself, and that is, in fact, what he did last time around. He is dogged on the campaign trail with a number of personal history things that are pretty easy to take potshots at. The biggest one being that he often runs as a strong pro-life candidate, but there are credible stories that he paid for a girlfriend's abortion, I think in 2000 or the early aughts. And he has said, yeah, sure, I gave her $300 to go to the doctor. I had no idea what that was for. I mean, you kind of roll your eyes. So people can hit him for that. The thing you're talking about, Nathan, is it emerged in 2022 that there was some sort of arrest of Mike Erickson in Hood River, Oregon, I think where he lives, where it looked like he was drunk, but potentially had an oxycodone pill in his wallet at the same time. And on the ticket, on the sort of write-up that the police officer made, that said, we're charging him with felony drug possession. Salinas dutifully, as a candidate, went out on the campaign trail and said Mike Erickson was charged with felony drug possession. But the actual facts of the case were a little murkier. In fact, the DA in Hood River County never actually filed the charge of felony drug possession. There was negotiations as these things play out. And so Erickson has, he sent a cease and desist letter to the Salinas campaign at the time saying this is incorrect. When they didn't take the ads down, he sued. I was trying to look this up last night, actually, Nathan, but the court site was down. They were doing maintenance on it. So I know it went, I think
they knew we were trying to record this.
I think Erickson prevailed in the lower county court. And I know it went to a court of appeals. Now that can take a long time for the court of appeals to sort of decide. So as far as I know, that was February, I think, when they argued it. And that's where it sits. I could be wrong, and people that are more informed, but this is still very much a live matter of law as far as I know. And meanwhile, we got Erickson gearing up for another race. Right now, he has not showed he's willing to plunk down a lot of money like he was last time, and Salinas does have a lot of money. So I think, he's also not fundraising a terrible amount. I think something's going to have to change in the 6th in order for this to be interesting at all.
And I wanted to ask about the 4th congressional district, moving even further south into Southern Oregon, where Democratic Congresswoman Val Hoyle is running for re-election. Republicans here in D.C., Dirk, are making a lot of hay about various alleged scandals connected to Hoyle based on her time in the state, back in the state before she was elected to Congress. How much are those stories resonating and actually part of the conversation in Oregon, and how do you view this congressional race?
Yeah, this one has been hard to pin down. So there, probably too much to go into in this podcast. I mean, there was a whole scandal last year regarding the owners of this cannabis dispensary chain, and the fact that they had sort of actually hired the Secretary of State to do consulting work on the side, which was a huge scandal. But they'd also been giving all sorts of money to Democrats, high-powered state Democrats, sometimes in cash. It was a very shady situation, pretty interesting, actually. And Hoyle was implicated in all that in a couple of ways. She took, I think, cash donations from these folks, but then also when she was labor commissioner of the state of Oregon, she appeared to sort of go to bat for this company and get it a $500,000 grant to start some sort of nonprofit effort. I forget exactly the details, but it did appear like she was pretty cozy with these folks. She went to bat and tried to get them this money, even though at points it seemed like maybe they weren't, qualified for the money. And that has dogged her a little bit. I don't know that lingers as much here as the Republicans in DC. I mean, it is some smoke that they can point to. Obviously, the way DC and national politics works, they are going to point to it as furiously as they can. There hasn't been the fire, I would say, here in Oregon that definitively shows, what they want, which is that, Val Hoyle is corrupt beyond measure, that we can point to this exact thing that shows, she's selling her allegiances left and right. And meanwhile, uh, we need to see how strong of a candidate or opponent she gets, right? We have an attorney and I think Air Force veteran named Monique Despain, who appears like she will get the Republican nomination. I think she's showing signs that she'll put forward a hard fought campaign. But right now in the money race, it won't surprise you that Hoyle is dominating, and she's going to need some real backing. Despain is, if she wants to make this a real race in the general. I mean, the thing about the 4th district is, during redistricting, it was shored up a little bit to make it easier to win for the Democrats. Peter DeFazio liked to say he was this sort of last defense in the door, sort of holding things together in the 4th when it was a little more closely contested between the parties. And he really felt like he could step down a couple years ago because redistricting gave him more breathing room to do so, and that another Dem could step in. So I think the Ds are pretty confident in the 4th. There's not much reason at this point that they shouldn't be, but again, things change really quickly. There could be something that emerges before November.
Yeah. And I feel like this is one of these seats that Republicans have talked about for a number of cycles. With Alex Scarlatos as their candidate in 2020 against DeFazio, and then in 2022 against Val Hoyle, and he, with coming in with his heroic, heroic turned celebrity, turned not so great podcast guest. It makes me a little
There's
skeptical.
a lot there that people are going to have to unpack, Jacob, but I don't know. We have just like 20 things in there, but that's all right. Go ahead.
No, all I'm saying is that, I think that this is not the first time that the ingredients for Republican optimism have been there, but not enough to make a really competitive race. And so I don't, it feels like the burden is on Republicans at this point still to show that this is actually a viable pickup opportunity and not just something to talk about.
Fun fact for you Alex Scarlatos heads out there, he ran for county commission unsuccessfully. He ran for Congress. He will finally win elective office this year because he is the lone Republican. He's the Republican nominee for a very, very Republican state house seat. So he is coming to Oregon's capital next year.
The capital is Salem, folks, not Portland. For any of you if there's any confusion about that. But anyway.
Well, then who knows? 2026, 2028. We might be hearing from him again before too long. And now for our final segment. Dirk, I hope you can stay here with us for just a few minutes to do Look What I Found. It is the segment where we highlight something new that we've stumbled across. It could be political, sports, music, TV, something else entirely. You never know what you're gonna get. I will go first. I found and purchased a print by a cartoonist named Al Hirschfeld, who was a longtime cartoonist for the New York Times, of the 1988 Democratic presidential primary field. So the 7 top contenders, Michael Dukakis, Paul Simon, Jesse Jackson, Al Gore, Dick Gephardt, Bruce Babbitt, and I've got it hanging up over there, Gary Hart. How could I forget? And only after I purchased it did I learn the provenance, which is that it was of a limited run that was given to Democratic donors and activists, a few Democratic donors and activists, toward the end of the 1988 presidential election cycle as a thank you for their efforts in supporting Michael Dukakis. Obviously, unsuccessful efforts, but it didn't get him elected president, but it got me a cool print to hang up. And so that's what I found this week.
I love it. It's so specific, Jacob. Was this a hot bidding war? I don't know. This feels like this is very.
No,
this is a very small audience here.
Second Story Books, which is a used bookstore in DuPont Circle. It's been hanging up there for a little while. I saw it. I was like, should I get this? Should I not? I did a little research. I thought about it, and it's one of those things where if I didn't get it, I knew that I would be kicking myself, when I walked in one day and it wasn't there anymore. So it's pretty cool. It's he's got a very unique style. And I was happy that I could pretty much identify all six of the seven very easily. Bruce Babbitt, I was not able to identify without some help. So sorry for all the Babbitt fans out there, the Babbitt bros.
Well, I'm gonna take some stress off of Dirk because I don't know what he's gonna say and go in a very different non-political decision that I think I found a player on the Washington Nationals to root for. Shortstop CJ Abrams, probably the best young up-and-coming prospect that the Nationals have right now. I hope the Nationals sign him to a long-term deal. I'm feeling a little jaded about watching so many good Nationals players either get traded or leave. Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, Max Scherzer, whatnot. So I've been slower in getting back into this chapter of the Nationals, but I feel like CJ Abrams, let's go for it.
So the thing I'll mention is a very chagrined suggestion for me, and it's something probably a lot of people found in last week, which is NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center, which I did not know exists, which predicts, as it says, space weather. This came about because a big regret in my recent life is that last Friday, I have a young child. I go to bed early these days, and so I went to bed at 10:30 or something, only to wake up the next day to learn that if I had just stayed up 45 minutes later and looked out my front door, the glory of Aurora Borealis would have been shining all over my horizon, as my social media feeds told me again and again and again. And yet I went to bed and I didn't fully understand the significance of this solar storm that was happening. And I really, really regret it. So now I know about the Space Weather Prediction Center, which can help us learn if Aurora Borealis is coming to our towns. I don't know if you guys saw it down there.
It's too cloudy. It was really, we got two bites at the apple too, because it happened, I guess, 2 nights in a row. And I think both times it was like we were in the midst of a week-long rain spell.
Okay. So. Yeah, not so here. It's just a full missed opportunity for me. And wow. In fact, we went out the next night and nothing was happening in our neck of the woods, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to book trips to Iceland now. Now they missed out. It's like we'll be chasing that high forever.
Right.
Well, Dirk, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a lot of fun. We're going to be watching these Oregon races for the next 6 months. So we'll be keeping up with your coverage, and thanks again for coming on and chatting with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for the invite.
That's all the time that we have. We recapped some consequential primary results from Maryland, West Virginia, and Nebraska. And we went long on Democratic primaries in Oregon's 3rd and 5th districts, as well as what to expect from the Beaver State this fall. Thank you for joining us. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you don't like today's episode, please email David Trone. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer Conrad Tulosa. Please come back and join us next time.